The city trembled when he walked. Merchants paused mid-bargain. Mothers hushed their children. Even the soldiers gripping their spears averted their eyes. The ground beneath his feet bore the scars of his battles. Cracked stone where he had stood. Splintered wood where walls had fallen by his hand. Samson was no ordinary man. He was a force of nature wrapped in flesh and bone. Tonight, he stood at the gates of Ashkelon, Philistia's proudest city. Behind him, the wilderness stretched endlessly. Before him, the city's towering gates loomed shut. The Philistines had sealed themselves inside, thinking iron and stone could hold back the will of God. Samson smirked. With a deep breath, he pressed his hands against the gates. His fingers sank into the wood as if it were soft clay. Then, with a roar that sent ravens flying from the rooftops, he ripped the gates from their hinges. The earth groaned beneath him as he hoisted them onto his back, gates, posts and all, and carried them away like a shepherd bearing a lamb. Inside the city, torches flickered as terrified soldiers scrambled to their positions. But it was too late. Samson had already stepped inside. It wasn't just brute strength that made him unstoppable. It was the fire in his soul. Samson was a man at war, not just with the Philistines, but with fate itself. He had slaughtered 1,000 warriors with nothing but a donkey's jawbone. He had torn a lion apart with his bare hands. He had shattered armies, toppled kings, and reduced fortresses to rubble. And yet, the Philistines still dared to stand against him. Tonight, they would learn. They came at him in waves, blades flashing, arrows singing. But Samson was faster, stronger. A sword swung for his neck, but he caught the blade with one hand and snapped it like a twig. A spear flew at his chest, and he snatched it midair, hurling it back with bone-breaking force. He fought like a storm unleashed where others would fall. Samson stood unyielding, his every strike a sentence, his every breath a declaration of dominion. He did not fight for glory. He fought because the Spirit of the Lord stirred within him like fire in dry reeds. When the battle ended, Samson stood alone amid silence. The ground was littered with broken weapons and broken men. Smoke curled around him, a crown of mist rising from his sweat-drenched shoulders. Some tried to run. Samson did not chase them. He did not need to. They would carry his legend with them. As the sun rose, Samson stood among the ruins of another Philistine stronghold. His body bore wounds, but he did not falter. Strength coursed through him, an unbreakable tide. Yet, deep in his heart, he felt it, a shadow creeping closer. He was not invincible, not forever. Somewhere beyond the horizon, fate sharpened its blade. He could break cities, but he could not break the destiny waiting for him. The sun beat down like judgment on the dusty battlefield. The stench of sweat, blood, and dust hung thick in the air. Around him, 1,000 fallen Philistines lay still, their weapons scattered like broken promises. In his hand, the jawbone of a donkey, slick with blood, cracked, and now heavy like iron. Samson staggered forward. His chest heaved, his muscles trembled, not with power, but with exhaustion, and the rush of divine strength that had surged through him moments ago had drained, and now he was just a man. His lips were cracked, his throat burned like fire. Every breath was a gasp. He dropped the jawbone. It clattered to the ground. Then, with dry lips and a voice hoarse from shouting and war, he cried out, not in victory, but in desperation. God, you gave me this great victory, and now shall I die of thirst? Will I fall into the hands of these uncircumcised after all this? The wind stilled, the battlefield was silent, and then a low rumble. The rock beside him, just a hollow place in the dry ground, split open. From the crack, water burst forth, clear and cool. It didn't gush like a flood, it flowed like grace. Enough for a thirsty soul, enough to say, I see you, Samson. Samson fell to his knees, cupped the miracle in his hands, and drank deep. Life returned, his strength revived. The fire in his spirit flickered back to life. He named the place En-Hakkore, the spring of the one who cried out. Because even the strongest man in Israel had to learn. Real strength comes when you know how to cry out. He knew his strength was not his own. It was borrowed, divine, and fleeting. There were days he felt it slipping, not from age, but from purpose. Each battle became more brutal, each victory more hollow. His fists were strong, but his soul was tired. The people's champion yet. He remained the last great hope of his people. When they saw him, they remembered freedom. When he fought, they remembered the covenant. The Israelites had no king, no armies, but they had Samson. In the hill country of Zorah, children carved his likeness into stone. Old men recited his victories by firelight. Women wept prayers of protection for him, though he never stayed in one place long enough to be thanked. He lived between wilderness and war, between calling and curse. The Philistines named him a monster, but the people called him deliverer. Once, while journeying through the mountain passes, Samson was ambushed by mercenaries, hired blades from distant lands. They thought him weary, alone and vulnerable. They were wrong. The rocks echoed with the clash of steel, but Samson used none. He picked up a broken ram's horn from the earth and wielded it like a king's sword. He moved with rage, yes, but also with grace, like a man born to war. He felled them all, and when the last lay breathless, he whispered a prayer, not of triumph, but of mercy. No eyes had witnessed that battle, but the wind carried the story. In quieter times, he walked the vineyards and olive groves alone. He did not drink wine nor cut his hair. His life was a vow, his days a sentence. Sometimes he would kneel by the Jordan and whisper to God, not demands, not pride, but questions. Why me? Why strength without peace? Why victory without rest? The wind offered no reply, but Samson stood again each time. Because to him, to carry the weight of a nation was not a burden. It was destiny. Years passed. Fewer battles came. The Philistines grew craftier, more political. They tried to trap him, bribe him, avoid him. But Samson remained, until one day he disappeared from the battlefield, not because he had fallen, but because he was waiting for the final blow, the last stand, the purpose whispered over his life before birth. He was Samson, the last champion, the walking flame of a forgotten covenant. In the end, he did not fade, he did not surrender. He simply stepped into the silence between stories, waiting for the time when he would rise again, when his fall would not mark defeat, but the shaking of empires. Let this story teach you. When the world forgets its champions, heaven remembers. And when heaven moves, even the pillars of kings must tremble. The end.